everybody. Welcome to Toasted the Podcast. You got Nick, Margie, and our very special guest, super fan, Nicole Morello Wright, my daughter-in-law. So I am ecstatic to be able to have Nicole here on the show with us. This is very big for me. So, hey, Nicole, how are ya?
I'm doing great.
Nicole's like, your energy level is too high for me. So, Nick, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I still have my Christmas tree up behind me because it's pretty.
I saw that.
I want, it's white. For people who have not seen us on YouTube, it's a white Christmas tree with bright white lights, and it has like silver sparkly tips on the branches and stuff. So it has no ornaments on it, and it's just really pretty. And I like to have the apartment just lit up by the Christmas tree. So I've decided it's going to stay up probably through February, but we'll see.
That's a good time frame.
So like to the end of February, because we're in February.
Oh, you're right. We are in February. Today is February 1st. You're right. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. Point well taken. So definitely at least until, my friends Amy and Julie and Lynn are coming for a girls' overnight February 18th into the 19th. So I may take it down on President's Day, the 20th. That somehow seems appropriate. I don't know why, but somehow it does. So that's kind of where my thinking is with that. But I'm surprised Elliot's not trying to make an appearance. Like I really am impressed. Did you send him away?
No, he doesn't want to. He's playing video games. So he has his headphones in, which means he can't hear anything. So
can't hear anything. Yeah. So that means you can say anything. So we are super glad to have you here on the podcast. You have been a faithful listener, as I said. And what I am so appreciative of is Thursday mornings, I'll get texts from Nicole, and she will share with me her thoughts, feedback, input, suggestions, all of that. And it's been a really cool relationship that you and I have separate from Elliot, my son, your husband, from that. It's just ours. And I love that. So that's really cool. And I appreciate all of that. So what is your initial, as far as Toasted the Podcast goes, what's your just initial, anything you want to share with us that's nice and kind and uplifting?
You don't want to give me any direction or anything.
No, none. It's all you. Whatever direction you want to go in, that's uplifting, nice, and kind.
I don't know. I also enjoy texting with you on Thursday mornings about it. I also enjoy your son's level of discomfort when he hears your voice coming out of the speakers. It's very distressing for him.
Which is hilarious.
It's just very fun.
I don't know. My kids have mentioned it a couple times too. In fact, my favorite conversation actually was, Dad, why do a podcast on failure? Like, why wouldn't you do a podcast on success? And I was like, that's a great idea. And everyone does a podcast about success. He's only 10. So it was like a really interesting conversation. And I said, we're trying to open up a conversation with people about, learning more from things that they go through and experiences they have. And he goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And that was it. But that's the only time they really mentioned it. It's kind of funny.
That is very funny. So what are we talking about today,
Nicole? We have to keep in mind. Oh. Well, first, I just want to say we have to keep in mind that, Margie's son, Elliot, is a fully grown man who is uncomfortable hearing his mother's voice because she's not in the room. So I guess maybe object permanence has not landed yet for Elliot, maybe.
There's a wee bit of that. We will say that. So what would you like to share with us? This is your time to share with all of our podcast family, our Toasted family out there. We've had such a great range of topics recently. And I've just found that to be so, exciting is a strange word. It's exciting in the sense that this platform can reach and touch so many different topics. But I'm so grateful that people are able to see pieces of this in their own lives, in their own way, in so many facets. It's like toasted kaleidoscope. So I'm excited to see whatever it is that you're going to be bringing to the table today.
So what I'm bringing to the table today is, I don't know. I was trying to come up with like a succinct way to put it all day while also trying to like switch over all of my book displays at work. But basically, I'm going to talk about just the experience of when succeeding is kind of a failure, I guess, would be the way that I can put it for now.
Okay.
Which will probably make more sense like as I keep talking, but that's what we're going to go with.
I like it.
I love the irony and the tension right now.
Yes.
You're going to talk about
succeeding.
So when succeeding is a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Man, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, my other
fun.
tagline that I was considering was like living with giving up on your dreams.
Okay.
Wow.
Definitely.
All right.
So clearly they're
Maybe
related.
we'll
It was
touch
just a
that
matter
too,
of which
yeah.
one we're going with. Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's all the same story, just different flavors.
But isn't that so much of life? I don't know. I'm having one of those existential days where it's like one little thing here, there. It's So I think it must be the first of the month, or the fact that it will be a Leo full moon on the 5th. So just saying, this Sunday, be ready, people. Full moon in Leo, which of course is a very big deal to this Leo. So yes. And Nicole's birthday is Friday. Happy almost birthday.
It is. Yeah.
So happy almost birthday. And your birthday present is squarely in the guest room because I forgot to give it to Nick and Amanda when they were here on Sunday for Thanks Christmas. I finally had part 3 of Thanks Christmas. So my bonus son, Nick, and his girlfriend, Amanda, could not travel to Syracuse, where we ended up having to move Thanks Christmas. We had to pivot and have Thanks Christmas at Elliot and Nicole's house. My daughter, Abigail, and her boyfriend, Jake, were able to join us, but Nick and Amanda, unfortunately, were not. So we rescheduled it here. Nick and Amanda live in Buffalo, and I'm only 45 minutes south. And so we planned, okay, we'll do, part 2 for us. Weather, again, canceled the plans. And so this is our 3rd attempt. And thankfully, 3rd time was a charm. The weather cooperated, and they came over, and we had a fantastic time. And I said, do not let me forget to give you Nicole's birthday present to bring to Syracuse with me for her birthday party. And I forgot. So guess I'll just have to come visit you guys in Syracuse soon.
I don't know why that feels like every story in my week this week, where like I plan everything out and then I get wherever I'm going, I'm like, I forgot that, and then I can't do the thing I'm there to do. Yeah. And then I turn around and I go back and I replan. I did that like 3 times with different things this week. I
think I was so consumed with making sure. So Nick is insanely a fan of cheese. So for Christmas, I got them like a beautiful slate cheese board and all the utensils that go with it, chocolate, wine, and cheese, to have like a little, date night type thing or stay in party, whatever. And I was like, do not forget these stacks of cheese in my refrigerator to take home with you, which is part of your, these different cheeses I picked out. So I think I was so focused on making sure that he went home with cheddar and Gouda and everything else that I forgot your birthday present. So I'm sorry.
Okay. It's all right. So, we're gonna have a full house. Somehow we're gonna fit 6 extra people in this house. So
I love it. That is awesome. That is awesome. So now that I failed at getting you your birthday present, let's go ahead and So happy birthday on Friday, and tell us about success leading to failure.
Okay, so this all started when Nicole was just a little girl. So from the time that I was little, my family lived in Queens until I was about 9, and then we moved to Westchester, which, if you're from New York City, you understand that was moving like basically to Canada, essentially. We moved upstate, as it were. upstate, 45 minutes outside of New York City. And
which gets into interesting conversations when we talk about being upstate.
Yeah. Well, my thing is always, is it up from where I live? Because if I have to go up, then it's upstate. Like, sorry.
We get it.
Yeah. So, I was always in love with like the city, and my whole entire family is from the city. My grandparents lived there, grew up there, etc. My cousins, my whole family. I am actually the first one in my family to settle outside of like the New York metro area. Like I'm the only one. We all went to college other places for the most part. But I am the first one to not return to the city. And that kind of like foreshadows where we're going. So I always that's always what I wanted. I was like, I'll go to college wherever, it doesn't really matter. But the bottom line is I want to live in the city. And that is always what I've said. That is what I said to my ex-boyfriend when we started dating. That is what I said to Elliot when we started dating, was that was where I wanted to be. That was where my family was. And that was like what I like wanted. And I graduated college and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I moved back in with my parents and I worked at Starbucks, and I was like, I can't afford to be near Elliot. I can't figure out what I want to do. And so I went to grad school, and that's how I ended up in Syracuse, which is where we are now.
Wow.
So, yeah. So
you did grad school in Syracuse?
Yes, at SU.
Okay. Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so the whole time that I was in grad school, Elliot was on his deployment for a whole year of that. And I was living by myself in Syracuse where I didn't want to be, just like counting down until I got my master's and then I could get a job back downstate where my family was. And that was my sole focus. I was only looking at jobs in that area. I went on like 1 or 2 interviews, and like that was like, we had talked about it and that was our thing. And we were like, okay, these are the things we're going to give up to do that. And like, this is like, because we just want to do it. So like, we'll probably never own a house. We might never have like a dog or things like that. Like we'll have to have like a very tight budget, like from the jump. And we were both like kind of on board with that. I could tell that Elliot really liked Syracuse and he kind of wanted to stay here, but like he knew that it was important to me to be near my family and that this was a dream that I had like from my childhood. I never imagined myself being anywhere else. And then we had COVID. And so, like I still was employed and everything. So that wasn't really a problem. It did make looking for jobs a little tricky.
Yeah.
Because it was hard to do interviews.
Yeah.
And I had one job offer in West Nyack, and it was the exact job I wanted. It was like a teen librarian position, which was what I wanted. It was a public library. And it was in the area that I wanted, not the exact area, but it was close enough that I would only be like maybe like 45 minutes at most away from like my parents and most of my family. And so it was basically like where I wanted to be. And at first they actually did not offer me the job, but then they came back to me because the person they hired didn't work out. And they're like, hey, like you really wanted the job. Like, do you still want the job? And I did. And I, for some reason, had the presence of mind to be like, you know what, let me just talk about that with my husband, because Elliot did not have a job. So I was like, okay, well, only one of us would have a job. Let me talk through it with him. And we looked at it and we realized that it wasn't going to work out. Like, we would basically they offered me, the salary was going to be about $50K a year, which, if you're familiar at all with like the New York City area, that is not a lot of money.
It might cover your rent.
Poverty. Might.
Not even. Just
Yeah.
barely.
Yeah.
And so, and Elliot was going to be starting an apprenticeship program, but there weren't openings yet. We didn't know like when that was going to happen. And we were like, you know what? It's not going to work. And so for 3 days, I was just sick over it. And I was looking for permission to say no to this thing and to choose to live in Syracuse, because I had started to think about things and we started to see, hey, we kind of like it here. If we stay here, we could have a house. We could probably have a dog. We could probably get ourselves new cars. We could probably do all the things that like we wanted to do that we might have had to sacrifice to go live where I wanted to live. And even though like logically you look at those two things side by side, right? Like, it's like I can take the job that would put me where I want to be, that would be like fulfilling most of my dreams and where I always imagined myself to be for the rest of my life. I could take that and be happy, and like have to give some things up and like really like have to kind of struggle to make it work. Or I could try to literally come up with a new vision and dream for like my life and choose to stay in Syracuse, which is clearly what we did. We're here in our house that we bought. And so now
With a great
like
library.
with a fantastic library. It's great. The neighbors walk by and they see it through the window. And like Elliot was taking out the trash and they were like, you guys have really cool books in there. Like, they just like look through the window.
Aww. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's nice. And so we have a lot of the things now that are like, I would say like things that most people in our generation aren't going to have. Like, pretty much we are the only ones of our friends, except I think maybe one of Elliot's friends. They bought a house. None of my friends really anticipating owning a house in the near future, if at all. And so we have that. We're saving up to buy a car for Elliot, like all of these things. And it's really, really great. Except that now both my grandparents, but my nanny in particular, who's my mom's mom, she passed away in October and she had dementia. And so she did not remember that I lived in Syracuse. She did not remember that I was married. So when she would see an envelope, she'd be like, who is Nicole Wright? And I would be like, that's me. And she'd be like, that's you. And I'd be like, yep. And now she was at the wedding. And so my mom would be like, yes, they're married. And my nanny would just go, well, I don't know. So, you know, so I had already come to terms with the fact that like nanny probably wouldn't be like up to date on my life or anything. But the thing that was hard about staying in Syracuse and having all of these nice things and really getting set up for a future with more things than I thought I would have in it, I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that my nanny would never be a part of that at all, and that I would not be there really when she passed. And so obviously I came face to face with that a few months ago when my mom had to FaceTime me from the hospital and tell me that my nanny had passed and I was not going to be able to get downstate right away because it's like a 4.5, 5 hour drive because they live in the Bronx now, which means that like just getting from the GW to the Bronx, which should be like 10 minutes, takes like 45. And so I had to get all of this way and figure out my work schedule and whatever to get down to be with my mom and be with my family. And something that sits with me every day after that is that I don't live in the city. And that's where my nanny is buried. That's where my grandpa is buried, and that's where my nanny is buried. And so I will not get to visit her in the future as much as I probably would have otherwise. And it just kind of, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to, like, making the decision to cut off something that you anticipated being in your life, that you, like, never thought you would have to consider living without. And reconciling that with all of these new things that you have and that have been made possible by the fact that, like, I got a great job that I love here. We love our city. We love our neighborhood. We love our house. Everything is great. It's perfect for all of the things that we want to have in life. But at the same time, being the first one to say, I couldn't afford to make it back to, like, the homeland, so to speak. I'm the first one because my cousins are older than me and they both live in Manhattan. And and I am the first one that did not go down a path that would get me there. And that was a hard thing to kind of acknowledge, was that for me to be happy, I had to fail. I had to say, I cannot do it. Like, I had an opportunity, I had that job opportunity. My parents were like, you can live with us while you save up a little more money. Like, we had a whole plan for how we could do it. And I had to choose to say, no, I actually didn't make it. Like, it actually wasn't enough. I did all of these things and it ended up not being enough. And so just like reconciling all of those things, right? Like, on the outside, it looks so great. And then the reality is that, you know, on the day that we were starting to move stuff in, Margie was making a couple trips with Elliot back and forth from our very lovely apartment. That's sarcasm.
Said with great sarcasm.
In case it wasn't clear. Yes, from our lovely apartment to our house. And while you guys were out, I spent a little time sitting in my new library that I was so excited about, with all of my books that I love and that made me so happy. And like thinking about how my house was so much of a dream come true, and crying because, you know, maybe 5 years ago or whatever, I would have been calling my nanny to tell her all about the house. And she was still alive at this point, but she didn't remember that I don't live like with my parents anymore. She didn't remember that I was even looking for a house. She didn't remember that I told her that we had bought a house. And so I was not calling her to like share this big milestone. And part of that was because I was living in Syracuse. She was never going to see this house that I was in because I couldn't make it to live close enough to her that she could have also shared in this like big life moment. And so like for me, that was like when it got like really heavy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you said, and I mean, I've known you, oh my gosh. So I would have met you at the fall show because you and Elliot met doing theater at Roberts Wesleyan College. And that was his first semester freshman year. So it would have been the fall of 2014. So we've known each other for a bit. And I mean, you definitely always talked about the city, and your family was always there. You know, I mean, I met your nanny numerous times. And you know, because she was always there at the shows, and you've shared about growing up. So maybe share a little bit about that, like how, you know, your nuclear family, your family's very tight. It's, you know, just the culture is very tight. The relationships are very tight. And, you know, even, you know, and that was your childhood was spent between your grandparents' houses, you know, when not at your own house, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. When at my house, when I was really little, it was Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nanny and Grandpa came over to babysit me. Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm pretty sure it was. My grandma would come over and babysit me because we lived in Queens at that time, and so it was really easy. And so, yeah, like we're all very close. And like I kind of said, I'm the first one in the family to not come back to the city. And you know, it's kind of fun because my two cousins are older than me. My one cousin is 5 years older than me, and then I don't actually know how old my oldest cousin is, but he's definitely older. So not like older, but he's older than the cousin who's 5 years older than me. So they're so they're like so they're into their careers and everything and into their life. And so I was also the first grandchild not to move in with grandma and grandpa for a period of time after college. And that was a little bit of a joke in the family because both of my cousins moved in with them kind of in a period, I don't want to say like while they were trying to find themselves because that's a little dramatic, but like essentially they were like in a transition period where they were looking for a place to land. And yes, exactly. And so I happened to be the first grandchild that didn't move in with my grandparents. And that was actually part of where I was like, ooh, if I could get a job at a library in Queens, then Elliot and I can both move in with my grandparents, which like my parents were like, why would you want to do that? And Elliot was like, it would be amazing. I was just like, you're wrong, but like, it would be a little fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, it's, my family is not in many ways accustomed to like traveling this far. Like, yeah, they came to all my shows in college and stuff, but like, it wasn't like they were gonna like pop up for a visit, and they were always just like, oh my gosh, like it's such a long drive. And they're getting older, and so they're just like, I don't want to sit in my car for that long. And like, even my sister, who I love, she, every time she would come to a show at Roberts, which is where I went to undergrad, she would be like, why do you go to school so far away? And I would just be like, because this is where I wanted to go to school. And then she ended up going to SUNY Fredonia. So
which is ironic because that's where I'm at. So, yes. So Roberts Wesleyan is on the west side of Rochester. Yep. And then SUNY Fredonia is another 2 hours past that. So it was definitely a long trek from the Bronx to Fredonia, New York. Definitely.
Yeah. So
how does your family feel? Did they see this as a success leading to failure? Does your family see it in that regard?
I don't think so. I think my family just sees it as like smart, as a smart thing to do, a smart and practical thing. You know, I know my grandma for sure wishes that like we lived closer. But my grandma is in like, she's in that stage of like that like grandparents go through. Maybe it's just like kind of like an Armenian grandparent, a Puerto Rican grandparent type thing, where they're preparing for when they die. And my grandma is like aggressively giving away things to us.
Oh dear.
And so, yeah, and so she is so excited about our house and thinks it's so great. And every time I talk to her, she tells me all of the things in her house that will look great in my house, and the ones that she's ready to give to me, and the ones that she's not yet ready to give to me.
I can't hear you, Nick, if you're talking. I didn't know how long to let him do that for before I alerted him that the sound was not there. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I must have shut my mic off, but my other mic isn't working, so I don't know what's going on with that, but we'll worry about it later. But I was saying that what is interesting to me is my grandmother went through a very similar phase. So my grandfather passed away from a heart attack a couple of years before my grandmother eventually passed away, and he had Alzheimer's and had gotten pretty far gone when he had the heart attack. So it was kind of like almost merciful in some ways, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandmother, as soon as he passed away, we discovered that she also had dementia, but no one noticed because my grandfather's dementia was so much further
severe. Right.
But yeah, in that time when he got diagnosed, she started labeling everything. So in the back, you like Grandma, why is there a tag with this name on it on the clock? And she's like, well, you know, when I die, you'll know who it goes to. It's like, wow, that's weird. You know, it's a strange feeling, but I do think it's a phase.
It is. It is. Oh no, my Aunt Priscilla went through the same thing, and so yep. And I feel very fortunate. But I mean, it does. It's, you know, at first you're kind of like, like taken aback. And then at some point, every time you go over, you're like, please not do the bequeath tour. Like, this is disturbing to me. Can we just live in the right now? But for them, I think it's comforting. You know, they, you know, they're excited to give, to have a piece of them move on, to know where their important things are going. And now that, you know, my Aunt Priscilla, you know, passed away unexpectedly of a heart attack, and you know, I can look at some of the things around, and I'm grateful, and I can smile at those memories, and I love seeing her perfect penmanship, you know, still with the Scotch tape on the little piece of paper on the bottom of it, and that's very special.
Yep. Just to connect a couple dots for listeners, Priscilla was my 6th grade teacher. Mm-hmm. She was awesome. So
yeah.
Yep.
We love Priscilla Swing. She was great.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I mean, as far as going back to it, you know, I'm sure your family misses you. Obviously, I know your family, so I know they miss you. But do you think they would categorize this as failure? Or did they see you as you're successful because you have, you know, you made the choices you made to have the life that you want to have, just it's not in the location you want to have it? Or did those two things not reckon with, or not even, you know, register maybe is the right word with them?
I would say that for the most part, they see it as like just making smart decisions and like making the correct choice. My mom and I have had some conversations. We had a lot of conversation when I was deciding whether or not to take the job in West Nyack. I was like sobbing to her on the phone because I was like, I don't know what to do. And, and I, you know, she and I know each other fairly well. And, you know, it was the kind of thing that she said to me, like, she was like, whatever decision you make, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And like, that wasn't exactly what she said, but that's essentially like, there is some part of the choice that you make that like, you will always wonder, what would it be if I had taken the job in Nyack? Or if I took the job in Nyack, what would it have been if I stayed in Syracuse? And like, you know, my mom is very much like, she is very practical and realistic. And so like my mom was just like, oh yeah, obviously like years down the road, you're just gonna like be hit with that regret of like, oh, but like what if? And so like, I would say that maybe they don't perhaps put it in those terms of like, this is a goal that I had that I failed at, so much as like, you know, circumstances change and you make the decisions you have to make. I think I am okay with calling it a failure because in like kind of a technical definition of it, I had a goal and I didn't reach the goal. And I wasn't able to reach the goal. I did my best, the best that I could do, and it wasn't enough. And so it's not so much that I am a failure. It's kind of just, you know, I failed at this one thing. And now I'm quote unquote like successful, like especially, you know, for a millennial. But I feel okay being like, oh no, like this was a failure because like it was. There are things that I gave up. There are things that I can't have. It's one of those instances where there are just things in life that you can't have. And so I don't need anyone else to see it as a failure. It's my own personal failure. And like, I'm very okay with that because I do have all of these nice things, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be days where like I sit in my very big comfy chair that's big and blue and teal and like the size of a love seat, and Elliot and I can both fit on it.
In your library.
I don't sit in that chair and like in my library and put my little blanket on and cry because, you know, I'm not there for my family in the same way that the rest of my family can be there for each other.
No, I fully can understand that feeling.
Yeah. I'm kind of not exactly sure how to ask this question. I'm not even really sure what my question is, but you know what I'm thinking about here is like this culture, and I don't mean to like put you as a representative of all millennials, right? I guess that's what I'm a little hesitant about, but like,
I open the door, you can go for it.
Right. So I feel like as my generation and probably preceding generations were, I don't know, but I feel like this is, I'm just going to say it and then you can just call me a jerk and I'm okay with that. Okay. I feel like what you're talking about is like things that I grew up hearing. Right, there were the stories that my parents talked about, the difficult decisions that they had to make, and how they were like unhappy but dealt with it. Right now, I'm curious if like were those stories part of the millennial experience as well? Like, did you grow up hearing those stories, or was the narrative? Because here's where I'm going with this ultimately is like, if that's the case, like if the culture has shifted so far that we're not even telling those stories anymore, that's interesting to me because I think what most people listening would think was like, well, it's that damn social media, you know, that's the go-to answer for every problem in a millennial's life is it's the damn social media did it, you know? I don't know. Does that make sense? Like have stories have the stories that we passed on changed in some fundamental way?
Or is it more cultural?
I don't know that they have, but I think it's a different world. So like one thing that I talked about with my parents when they were coming to terms with the fact that I literally me and Elliot did not pick careers that would be able to afford us a place in New York City and in the area to be able to also do things like have kids or have a dog. Like probably we could have made it work, but then we never could have had any of the other things.
Right.
Or it would have like been a long time. And one of the things that they were saying was that like when they bought their first house, they spent about the same amount of money that we spent on our house here in Syracuse buying a house in Queens.
Right.
And those houses don't exist anymore. You cannot get a house for that price there. And I'm taking in many ways a similar path to my parents, except that I did not have a local option available to me. So
Gotcha.
in some ways, like those struggles are still the same. It's just that there are less options available to us. And so like, I have a lot of friends that like don't really anticipate buying a house ever because they just like can't afford it where they want to live potentially. It's like those, we all kind of, we're not able to reach a lot of the same things that our parents were. I wouldn't say that the stories have changed. I would say that some of the circumstances have changed. And so the goalposts have kind of shifted of like, what is like successful. Like the fact that I have a house is like a big deal. Like all of my friends come over, like, I have friends who still live with their parents and everything because they're just like, no, I don't want to live with 3 people to be able to have an apartment. I'll just save money and live with my parents. So I think it's like a massive combination of factors. I think it depends on where you live. Because all of Elliot's friends pretty much are buying houses now, but that's in Syracuse.
Right.
And
so it's more
my friends
regional.
who live elsewhere, that's not the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious more than anything because I do think, and I'm not to sound like a broken record on this podcast, but I do think that like my biggest concern is that we're not really doing a very good job of talking about failure really anywhere. We're not talking about it well in a workplace environment. We're not really doing a great job we're doing a terrible job in schools, if I'm being honest, of talking about it. And what's worse isn't so much that we're not doing it, is that in a lot of places, we're not even trying to get there. We're just kind of ignoring that this thing, which we all pretty much agree is where we learn the most in life, right? When you're at that intersection of success and failure, and however you want to think about it, I think that's, whether you were successful and then you became, I hate to say a failure, but a failure, or vice versa, like that's where you're learning the most, that transition. And we're just ignoring it. Or not talking about not everyone, but I think there's pockets, but
yeah. So on that
I'm
same
off my
vein,
soapbox. I'm done.
What would you say then has been the learning through this? What would you say has been the learning is my first question. And the follow-up question is, what are the things that you did for you? And we can go back to that one. I can elaborate more. But so what would you say are the lessons you're going to take with you that these are things that either are now, well, I'm just going to let you answer. I'm not going to qualify anymore. So what would you say are the lessons?
So you guys are educators, so you might not like this answer.
That's okay.
I already like it.
But what I'm going to say is, for me, I actually chose this because for me, this was an example of a failure where I did everything that I could have done. I did everything right. And so the only lesson that I learned was that you can't have everything you want. And that was it. And that's really, for me, there is no greater lesson. I know that I made the right choices for me and the right choices for the future that I want, but also some of it was, well, I can't afford to live there. I can afford to live here. These are realities of life. This is math. We all hate math, but right now I hate math for a different reason. And so there was nothing that I could have done in some ways that I could have done differently. And I would say I'm learning to enjoy things. I'm happy. I have a lot of things, I've set new goals and things like that, but there wasn't for me, there was no like big life lesson besides like life sucks and then you die.
Well, but do you think it's really a life sucks and then you die, or is there an application for that? Like you're right. You can't always get what you want. You get what you need, but I won't go on the song. So I couldn't help it. That was in my head. So, I mean, if the idea is you can't always get what you want. Okay. And this is big. This was childhood dream level. Your family, so much is connected to it. It's, the other half of you, if you will. So then where would the application be, do you think? Is there an application for this besides just life sucks and then you die? Like, can this be used as a platform for a way to persevere, or a way to cope, or a way to grieve? And maybe not. It's always a choice. Maybe ask you in 10 years.
I was going to say, probably not at this point. Are there too many applications going forward? Because there's still a lot of navigating, like President's Day weekend, my parents are going to come up to visit, and my mom has not been up to the house to visit since she came up to help us paint the kitchen before we moved in, because she couldn't leave my nanny. And it's like, it's ongoing. So there are new things that I didn't anticipate when I decided to stay here. Like, now my grandpa has dementia, and it progressed far faster than my nannies did. And so now, where I had thought literally like a year ago that my grandparents would be able to come and visit me, and I'd be able to have my whole family in my big house that I would hopefully have by this point, I can't, because they can't both come. And so if my grandma sees my house, likely it will be after my grandpa passes away. And to me, there's nothing to be learned from that, except just that sometimes things are hard.
And sometimes that's what it is, there.
Right. I feel like that's a massive and appropriate and incredibly human lesson.
Yeah, yeah.
That
doesn't mean there has like a happy ending.
Can't have it all.
Right.
Yeah.
So then how do you?
The other day,
sorry. Go ahead, finish, Nick.
No, it's okay.
No, I was gonna say, then what are your tools? Like, how do you reckon that? What are your tools? What are you doing through this in this process? I mean, because we do talk about rising through, and the rising doesn't mean like you've overcome or a success or suddenly the world is full of rainbows, but it's like, okay, you can choose to be, like you said, you will curl up sometimes with Elliot on your big, beautiful library chair and cry, but you don't stay in that spot. You might revisit that spot. But what would you suggest to people who are listening? What were the tools or the strategies or the things that you found either helped you to release those feelings, helped you to forward, helped just whatever? What would be the things that, if you're willing to share, and that, maybe certainly if there are book titles, suggestions, things like that, because, Nick and I are about that.
I know you guys are. I don't do self-help books, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But I would actually say that I personally find like just sitting with those negative feelings sometimes to be incredibly helpful, because I find it personally, and some of this has to do with like my own interpersonal history and like mental health history and everything. But for me, I find it very helpful to just like take that time when that feeling hits me to just be with it as long as it's going to be there. Because to me, to try to focus on, and like within reason, right? Like obviously, like if, a couple days in a row, I'm just crying all day, like then I have to employ some kind of strategy to be able to go to work and earn money. Like that is something that has to happen. But if I'm like sitting and crocheting and thinking about like, oh, if my nanny was here, she'd be watching me crochet and being like, oh, you're whipping along, and like then like missing her and then crying a little bit and just like grieving the fact that there are things that I've lost. And then when it's over, then I just move on to whatever I was doing. I either keep doing what I was doing. I just let it have its moment. And then like I keep going. And like I also have a therapist and antidepressants and all of those great things, which are awesome. So I have those things. But I also feel like, and like not to make it a generational thing, because I don't think it's generation specific. I think it's just more like every group's culture starts to shift over the years. And I think people my age are much more comfortable talking about things like this, because like me and my friends text each other all the time, all of like the memes that we send to our therapist, and we're like, oh my God, my therapist like said blah, 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 blah. Or like, oh, like I have therapy. Like I literally know which of my friends are in therapy, why they're in therapy, like what their issues are. Like one of my friends will text me and just be like, I'm so burnt out at work. I hate everything. And like, she'll just be like, I feel like I'm not good at my job. I feel like I'm whatever. And like, that's just, for us, it's a little bit more normal. And right now, what I have to navigate is
I would agree.
I work in a small town library. Yeah, I work in a small town library where much of the staff has been there forever. And so they don't have a lot of them don't have the same attitude. And so sometimes, because I have very intense depression, I go to therapy like twice a week and I'm on antidepressants. And so sometimes that affects my ability to work. Sometimes I am late for work. Sometimes I just like can't come in or whatever. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I get a little attitude from some of the staff who don't know why I'm not in. And then my manager does. And, like I'm open with her about it and we talk about it. And, that's fine. But I have to resist, like I have to remind myself, because to me, I'm just like, well, let me just explain it to them. And then like they won't care. But then, like then I sit down with my manager and we'll talk about like, that might not have the effect that you think it's going to have. And maybe you should like, wait, it's your decision. If you want to tell people, you can tell people, but like, maybe pump the brakes a little there. And so like, in many ways, like that's the hardest part of when those things hit, is that like, like we're kind of in an in-between.
And then you hit a good point.
In my library, we have the very old and the young.
Yeah, but I think you hit on a really good, micro example of, environmental workplaces. I know certainly in the schools, we have teachers that are brand new, just started out of college. We have teachers that are eligible for retirement. And I mean, God bless, I have a teacher in my district that, she's in her mid-70s and she has no intention of retiring. And she just loves it too much, which is wonderful. But those generational differences in what is acceptable to talk about, not acceptable to talk about, to share, to not share, all those sorts of things do make it a difficult structure to further the conversations about belonging, about acceptance, about empathy and compassion. Because I can say that, we got different groups right here. I mean, I'm in my, early 50s and Nick just started his 40s and Nicole is in her late 20s. And, it's just very different acceptances and copings. And like when I was Nicole's age, I mean, it was all about like, you just pretend it's all okay because that's what we all do. And you had a couple trusted friends, but, that was that. And I'm certainly not advocating for that. That's for sure. Cause I'm working through that right now, all these years later, but it is a very different space to be. And, part of my job is human resources. And so just the conversations that I have with people, I have to be cognizant of that lens. And it doesn't mean I always understand, but it's about having that space to allow for understanding. And I think that that's a really real topic that I really hadn't considered, in the sense of when you as the person are working through this, and with the strategies or copings or supports that you have, and how those can clash culturally in a workplace environment due to generational, not just differences, but acceptances, mindsets, beliefs about these things. So that's got to be difficult. That has to be very difficult. So what would you suggest for anybody who's sitting here listening going yes. And so now what does Nicole do about this? So you said you have your manager that you can trust. So it sounds like that's, a very solid working relationship.
Yeah. And so I kind of navigate day to day. I try to do smaller things that are less conspicuous. It's a little tricky because my desk is off to the side. And so most of the time I'm kind of out of view. I don't have an office. My desk is literally in the middle of the children's section. I have picture books all around me and everything. So it can get a little chaotic. And so one of the things that can bother me is lots of background noises. Ironically, children can be very triggering for me, which, as a children's librarian can be a little stressful. But so what I tend to do is I bring, yep. It is very distressing to me, for me to hear children being parented, really stressful. And so I have a couple things. I'll bring my AirPods, or I'll use the headset that we have at work, and I will just have that on. Because sometimes I am working on something. I'll usually try to put on something at least book related. Because I am a librarian. So if I'm listening to a book while I'm working, as long as I'm not at the reference desk, it's not that big of a deal. It is technically job related. And
research.
And so I'll just do that. And I will just deal with it. And the staff has gotten accustomed to, when they come up to me, I might have headphones in. It's not that I'm not going to answer them. They just have to take a second. And they'll tell patrons, you can interrupt her. It's fine. And so that's one thing that I kind of do that really helps a lot to just cut down on some of the noise. Cause 2 days a week, I have to go to work right after therapy. And sometimes I don't want to go to work right after therapy. Yes. I don't want to go be a children's librarian after therapy, because a children's librarian has to be friendly. And I don't really want to be friendly because all of these little gremlins are screaming and now I have anxiety. And so, so that's kind of the bare minimum. I don't have an office that I can go in and shut my door. All the kids are around me. They like to come behind my desk. It's just so it's little things like that, little things that I can do in my own space that don't affect, I don't know, the greater ecosystem of my workplace, I guess. Is what I would say.
That's a really great description.
I have a little pocket journal. Yeah, I have a little pocket journal if I want to write things down that I'm supposed to be kind of noticing, or thoughts that I have that I want to share with my therapist. Little things like that, so that I can just kind of because at work I can't really sit there and cry because I miss my nanny. That kind of really doesn't work when you're sitting where I'm sitting.
That can make it hard to. Might scare the gremlins.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. And so so that's just a good way that I can kind of tread water, I guess, until I can actually take the time to feel what I have to feel and move on. I can at least tread water until I get home, and then I come home. Yeah, and then I come home and I'm just where is my dinner? because Elliot makes dinner. So I'm like, please feed me. I'm sad.
Thankfully, he has.
I do think there's some health. I think it's much healthier to acknowledge, though, generally, than to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
I think my generation was maybe the first to really kind of like even just utter the words depression, and anxiety. I don't think was us. I think you guys kind of own anxiety, but we own depression. So
we own everything's fine. Everything's
you're like
fine.
depression 2.0. Yeah. And we were like, okay, I'm depressed. And, so you would kind of quietly go to therapy, or you would quietly self-medicate in whatever way you needed to do that. And that's not healthy either. And so I think a more open approach to it is ultimately healthy. I think it's going to take a little time to adjust. And the other thing I would say is like some of the misunderstanding has to do with like, there are some jobs where like, it sounds like you have a little bit of flexibility on what time you start, but like school starts at 8:00. And even if you're a millennial, you know what I mean? So I think sometimes there are like these sort of practicalities that get in the way of these discussions that become really like tricky. And as much as, I'm open to having those discussions, I think as a society, we have to find a way to navigate those waters because I think there's people in your boat, who do need those flexibilities and things like that. So I think, I just want to say I think it's super brave to share that. And that might be a cliche. Is it a cliche now?
Brave.
Is it a modern cliche?
It is a little cliched. Yeah.
Is.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
All right, then get us hip here, Nicole. What should we be saying that wouldn't be a cliche? If we're trying to say, thank you, that was incredibly brave of you. Just like I got nothing for you old people.
Yeah.
It's not so much that. It's more like, it's one of those things it's going to sound cheesy either way. And some of it is my own personal thing. I use humor to cope. I am very funny.
You are.
So, yeah, my therapist had to stop laughing at my jokes because she figured out what I was doing. And she was just like, okay, so like, why are you making a joke? Why are you really making a joke? And so like, for me, I'm always going to think that sounds cheesy.
Yeah.
But
right. No,
that is kind of what like young people say too. Like, we'll be like, oh yeah, cool. Like, thanks for sharing. Like,
yeah. I think, I just think that to be willing to be so open and willing to be brave. I'm going to give a shout out to our guest that we had on the last podcast, Nick's colleague and friend, Sarah. So on Toasted Tuesdays, we alternate talking about books, or Nick or myself will write a blog. Or we did have our special Toast and Jams with Steve-O the other day. So, there's sometimes we throw something new in there. But the blog I recently wrote, I was struggling. And so I had my laptop. It was early in the morning at like 5:00 in the morning. And I just started typing as if I were writing in my journal. And I'm outing you, Nick. So I sent it to Nick in an email at night because I was just like, I had to turn in my homework. That's how I felt about it. Like my assignment was the blog, and it just wasn't happening. And I couldn't do an alternate one. I had texted him earlier. I said, look, I'm just struggling. I wrote something I really, really did, but it's not to be posted. I just am, I'm going to write a new one. The day was nuts. It was in the evening and nighttime and all this. So I sent it in an email. It was a Google Doc. I sent in an email with this is for your eyes only. This is not to be posted. I just want credit for doing my homework. So like an hour later, I get a text that says,
oh, I know.
Love the blog. I posted it. It's just like, oh my gosh. So then, Nick talked me off the ledge that evening, and because it was late at night and I knew like nobody's reading it anyway. It was late at night. And I'm like, nobody probably reads it anyway, like period. So I'm convincing myself of all of these things. And so then it was, okay, but fine, I'll sleep on it. But in the morning, if I say take it down, it's being taken down. Like, went through all the reasons and all this. So then I shared it with Kelly, and I was like, okay, Kelly, like, I need another set of eyes on this. And, you know, what do you think? And she was like, I don't say anything. She's like, I agree with Nick. I think it should stay up. And I was like, oh. I said, all right, I'll see if I can make it till 12 noon. If I can make it till 12 noon with it up, then I'll let it stay up. Yeah. And so then Sarah texted me, all this to say, she texted me yesterday saying that she read the blog, that so much of it resonated with her, and that she felt seen. And I just started to, like, I had tears coming down my face because it was so hard for me to allow it to stay up there. So to share what you shared, Nicole, allows people to be seen. And that's what our fundamental belief and philosophy is in this podcast. And it's still the hardest thing for me to do, is to do exactly what you're doing, which is to be brave and open and honest, because it helps other people feel seen. And so thank you to Sarah. Thank you, Nick, for putting up with me. Yeah. And for Kelly for being the other voice of reason that, you know. So I didn't tell Nick the part about Kelly. So just to be clear on that.
I have to clear just one thing up, because as much as that would be something I would do anyway, I didn't actually see the message about your eyes only until long after I posted it. I saw, here's the blog post. I posted it thinking that's what you sent me. And so in my defense, I wasn't just putting it out there. I did really like it. And when I sent Margie my response, she goes, that wasn't supposed to go out. And I was like, what? Oh no.
I'm like, did you read the email that was with it? He's like, no. I'm like, oh
no, I didn't. Yeah. So I can be a jerk, I know, but not that much of a jerk. So
no, and no, that's why I was like, did you read the email? I was like, no, I didn't read the email. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Who reads the instructions?
Me, I read the instructions. I'm the person who reads the instructions.
Yes, I know you do. I know you do.
You also
I do too,
thank
actually.
you instructions, though. So, like, you
right.
Why, whatever do you mean?
Right.
But thank you for helping people be seen. Your story does that, so thank you.
I think it's a really neat conversation, and I really appreciate the fact that someone in their early 20s or late 20s listens to this podcast. I think it's pretty cool.
I know. So. We're grateful for that.
Anyway. All right. Well, we should do our cheers here, folks.
We should. Nicole, what are you sipping this evening?
I am sipping some Madeira, which was very confusing to the clerks at the liquor store where I bought it. They were just like, what do you do with it? And I was just like, well, I mean, I drink it. I don't know what other people do, but I drink it. So
Madeira was Thomas Jefferson's drink of choice.
There you go.
Oh, I didn't know that. Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nick is being healthy and hydrating tonight. He's just having water.
Water. Yeah.
Very good for you. Good for you for hydrating.
Kind of boring tonight.
So, yep. I'm having Hornito's Black Barrel Anejo Tequila, and this was gifted to me from Steve. He came over and we did our budgeting on Saturday, and I don't know if it was for his pain or mine, but we survived, and this is the tequila from Steve. So thank you, Steve, for the tequila.
Nice.
And raise your glass, and here we go. To Toasted, to Nicole, thank you for sharing your story, and cheers.
Cheers.
Yay.
Cheers.
Cheers. Happy birthday, Nicole, on Friday.
Yeah, happy birthday. That's awesome. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.